Welcome to Scroll to Soul, where ancient wisdom meets real-world execution strategy. Every economic system eventually reaches a critical breaking point, a threshold where capital concentrates in too few hands, debt burdens crush productive energy, and systemic collapse becomes inevitable. But thousands of years before central banks introduced quantitative easing or debt restructuring frameworks, a radical macroeconomic blueprint was instituted to preserve balance, prevent perpetual feudalism, and mandate scheduled wealth reboots. This is the Year of Jubilee, recorded in the 25th chapter of the book of Leviticus. If you are ready to build an anti-fragile financial foundation and master the art of long-term economic stewardship, you are in the right place. You are now among the practitioners. Let's unlock today's blueprint. When we analyze the historical expansion and eventual decay of major economic empires, we observe a consistent structural failure, the uncontained accumulation of debt, and the irreversible centralization of productive assets. In any unchecked market system, capital naturally attracts more capital. High net worth entities leverage their balance sheets to acquire land, buy out competitors, and issue high-interest debt to lower-tier market participants. Over time, those who experience financial setbacks are forced to liquidate their physical property, borrow against their future labor, and eventually surrender their economic independence entirely. This creates a self-reinforcing downward spiral, where a growing percentage of the population becomes permanently landless, indebted, and economically marginalized. From a macroeconomic perspective, this dynamic is fundamentally unsustainable. When the majority of market participants are weighed down by structural debt and stripped of asset ownership, consumer demand collapses, innovation stalls, and societal instability escalates. The concentration of property into a small elite class creates a fragile, top-heavy economy vulnerable to sudden revolutions or systemic breakdown. Ancient societies recognized this danger, but most rulers responded with ad hoc debt amnesties or emergency confiscations when social unrest threatened their power. The Mosaic Law, however, established a proactive, automated 50-year cycle designed to systematically reset the economy before catastrophic imbalance could occur. This sovereign economic mechanism is detailed in Leviticus chapter 25, centered on the Year of Jubilee. The text commands that after 7 cycles of 7 years, a period of 49 years, a 50-year milestone must be proclaimed throughout the entire nation. On the Day of Atonement, the trumpet, known as the shofar, was sounded across every province, declaring liberty to all the inhabitants of the land. The primary mandate of the Jubilee was threefold. All ancestral real estate that had been sold or forfeited during the previous 49 years was unconditionally returned to its original family lineage. All domestic debt obligations incurred through financial hardship were completely canceled, and all citizens who had sold their labor into servitude to pay off debts were fully liberated to return to their families and original estate. Let us analyze the sheer brilliance of this structural design. The Year of Jubilee was not a random welfare program or an arbitrary act of government overreach. It was an automated macroeconomic circuit breaker. By resetting land ownership every 50 years, the system prevented the formation of permanent land monopolies and feudal dynasties. It guaranteed that every family line, regardless of how poorly their ancestors had managed their finances or what catastrophic market shocks they had experienced, received a guaranteed structural reboot once every generation. No family could be permanently written out of the economic equation, and no corporate entity could build an unassailable, perpetual monopoly over the nation's core productive resources. Furthermore, the Year of Jubilee introduced a revolutionary financial concept that completely altered how real estate and debt instruments were priced, the ancient equivalent of discounted cash flow valuation. In Leviticus chapter 25, verses 14 through 17, the Creator issues explicit instructions regarding how land transactions must be conducted. If you make a sale to your neighbor or buy from your neighbor's hand, you shall not wrong one another. According to the number of years after the Jubilee you shall buy from your neighbor, and according to the number of years of crops he shall sell to you. If the years are many, you shall increase the price, and if the years are few, you shall diminish the price, for he is selling to you the number of the crops. This passage outlines a masterclass in realistic asset pricing and risk management. Under the Mosaic Code, absolute land title could never be permanently bought or sold by human beings. Verse 23 explicitly declares the core principle: the land shall not be sold permanently, for the land is mine, for you are strangers and sojourners with me. Therefore, when a buyer purchased a piece of land, they were not buying permanent ownership of the soil itself. They were purchasing a temporary leasehold contract consisting of the exact number of harvest yields remaining until the next Jubilee. If a real estate transaction occurred 5 years after a Jubilee, 45 harvest years remained, meaning the leasehold value was extraordinarily high. Conversely, if the transaction occurred 45 years after a Jubilee, only 5 harvest years remained, and the acquisition price dropped significantly. This financial rule completely eliminated speculative asset bubbles. Real estate could never be bid up to irrational, hyperinflated valuations based on distant, unprovable projections, because every buyer and seller knew with absolute certainty that the asset's leasehold would terminate on the 50th year. Prices were anchored strictly to the productive, time-bound harvest yield of the land. In addition to real estate valuation, Leviticus 25 addresses the ethics of lending and capital deployment during economic downturns. Verses 35 through 37 instruct, "If one of your brethren becomes poor and falls into poverty among you, then you shall help him. Take no usury or interest from him, but fear your God, that your brother may live with you. You shall not give him your money for interest, nor lend him your food for gain." This operational directive distinguishes between productive investment capital and predatory leverage. In times of crisis, lending money at high interest rates to a struggling peer is an act of economic extraction that accelerates systemic decay. The Jubilee model mandates that capital must be deployed to restore the productivity of the borrower, not to trap them in a compound debt loop that transfers their equity to the lender. Another vital dimension of the Jubilee framework is the principle of mandatory ecological rest and multi-year supply chain buffer management. Leviticus 25 outlines not only the Jubilee year, but also the sabbatical year, known as the Shemitah, occurring every 7th year. During both the 7th year Sabbath and the 50th year Jubilee, the land was commanded to rest completely. Agricultural operations, large-scale planting, and commercial harvesting were suspended. The society was forced to rely on stored reserves and the natural, uncultivated yield of the earth. This mandatory pause prevented agricultural soil depletion, protecting the nation's foundational resource from overexploitation. From an operational perspective, it forced business leaders and agricultural managers to build massive multi-year reserves during the 6 years of active production. They could not operate on fragile, just-in-time inventory models. They had to cultivate a long-term liquidity buffer capable of sustaining their entire household and workforce through extended seasons of planned non-production. For the modern practitioner, this highlights the necessity of strategic sabbaticals, planned downtime for systems, and maintaining robust cash reserves to navigate market contractions without panic. How does the modern practitioner apply the Jubilee blueprint in today's volatile macroeconomic environment? While we live in a global financial system dominated by fiat currency, perpetual debt structures, and central bank intervention, the core economic laws of the Jubilee remain immutable. First, you must master the art of personal and corporate economic resets. Do not allow debt liabilities to accumulate unchecked on your balance sheet. Periodically execute your own private Jubilee by systematically liquidating non-essential liabilities, clearing debt burdens, and resetting your capital allocation. Living under permanent high-leverage debt destroys your cognitive clarity and strategic flexibility. By enforcing scheduled debt liquidation cycles, you preserve your sovereign agility and protect your team from unexpected financial shocks. Second, adopt a time-bound leasehold mindset toward asset acquisition. Understand that no physical asset, business market, or competitive advantage is permanent. When evaluating real estate, corporate acquisitions, or technology investments, look past speculative hype and calculate value strictly based on the tangible yields you can extract during your operational window. Ask yourself, what is the realistic productive output of this asset before market conditions shift or the contract expires? Anchoring your valuations to real cash flows and clear duration models protects you from overpaying during market euphoria. Third, build systemic anti-fragility through multi-year reserve buffers. Just as ancient managers prepared for the 7th-year Sabbath and the 50th year Jubilee by storing 3 years of harvest, you must build robust liquidity reserves that allow your enterprise to survive extended periods of market stagnation. When a macroeconomic contraction hits, those without reserves are forced to sell their assets at distressed prices or accept predatory debt terms. But those who have built Jubilee-style liquidity buffers can comfortably ride out the storm, preserve their core team, and acquire high-value assets when prices return to baseline levels. Finally, recognize that human capital is your most valuable asset. The ultimate message of the Jubilee is that human beings cannot be permanently enslaved by debt, and families cannot be permanently stripped of their dignity. As a leader, your corporate policies, compensation structures, and management frameworks should empower your team to build true equity, develop their skills, and achieve financial independence. When you build an enterprise that respects the economic dignity of its people and guards against internal exploitation, you foster deep loyalty, operational excellence, and lasting stability. Knowledge without execution is just intellectual entertainment. A life of true impact is built through deliberate action. If this strategic breakdown brought valuable perspective to your journey, subscribe to the channel, like this video, drop a comment, and share this with others to help us build the practitioners community. Until then, keep executing.